Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell, joined as always by Mr. Zach Bartles. Zach, what's going on, man?
Oh, man, Mr. Bartles is my father. You can call me Reverend Bartles. Let me tell you what's going on. A, I'm really well rested and I feel great, just like you.
Yeah.
And B, I just found out that my debut novel with HarperCollins Publishing, Playing Saint, the ebook is on sale for 99 cents, and the thing is like rising up through the paid Kindle store ranks. And I think it would be a super fun experiment, don't you, if our listeners went over and paid 99 cents and read my book.
I agree. I definitely think they should. 99 cents, guys. You can't beat that. Get over there and pick that thing up.
Self-promo.
That's right. Hey, whatever works, man. We love promoting everything that you do. So let's rock it. And to Zach's earlier comment, we were just making a sly joke. I called him up and he was like, dude, you sound so down. And I'm like, I am exhausted. My wife's younger brother graduated from high school, and we had 20 some of us staying in one house. And we were staying up till all hours, getting very little sleep. And then yesterday, Monday morning, we were up till like 1 or 2 in the morning. And then my wife and I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning so that we could get on the road and get home. By the time we got home, we were just both so exhausted. And then I had to get up and teach again today. And I was telling Zach, end of the year, get all the kids, just craziness and everything going on there. It's like, we're done. We don't have to do anything. It's like, no. You still have 4 more class days, like teaching days. Like, we still go to school until next Friday.
I could still flunk you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. You don't realize like how I'm trying to impress on these kids. Like, your grades still matter. You could still get zeros on the tests that you have. But they're just at the point where they just don't care, and they need to. They really need to.
That sounds bad, Nathan, but it sounds better than what I had assumed, which was that your dog died, and then you got a new dog, and then that dog dug up the old dog and then died. So
you're thinking like all this
actually
horrible,
all right. Stressful.
Yeah, you're thinking all this horrible stuff's been going on. And it's like, no, just busy weekend, and came down. 20-some people. I'm sure I came down with some sort of sinus cold thing, so dealing with that. But dude, enough about me. Let's talk about Mission Aware, because at Christmas time I was promoting Christmas. At Valentine's Day, I was promoting Valentine's Day. Really, every day is the season for Mission Aware, and every opportunity is a great opportunity to pick up some of Mission Aware's cool products. We had that whole snafu where, Mission Aware was doing that great giveaway, and then I screwed up. And
we had that snafu. Well, it was a snap you.
Fair enough. When I say we, I was thinking me and Jeff, because I'm still not clear who the miscommunication was through. So I'm going to kind of leave that little loose there.
The royal
That's right, the royal we. But Jeff has all those names, so those prizes should be going out to all of you lovely people who left remarks for us on our iTunes page. So check out Mission Aware, great products. Zach, you've mentioned the 5 solas a ton on here, all those great products that they have. I actually think I convinced our Bible teacher at school to pick up the Romans poster. So nice. I think he's going to pick that up and put that on his bulletin board and have that there. So good stuff from Mission Aware. Check him out. Don't want to belabor this any longer, because I'm really excited for the guests that we have. Mr. Evan Davids, joining us today, wrote a book, Christianity No Longer Makes Any Sense, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get started, Evan, I want you to talk to us a little bit about yourself, friends, family, and I have a burning question actually that we haven't talked about. So that's kind of be the first thing after you intro yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and all that stuff. Evan, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Let's see. I mean, For our purposes, I'm basically just a guy who has thought a lot about Christianity and in the end did not think it made sense or is true. I can back up and give you some more bullet points there. What were some of the bio bullet points you were looking for?
Just, bio, friends, family, what you do for a living, where, all that crazy stuff. I mean, we'll get into, we'll get into the nuances of the book and all that.
I taught do you teach middle school? Is that what I heard?
I do, yeah, middle school science.
Okay. I taught middle school for a year, and then I went up to high school. But, so, man, that's tough work.
Yeah.
It was my first year teaching, and, 2 kids under 2, and it was rough, but so I've taught for a while. Right now I'm not. I kind of took a break, and I had some stuff I was doing on the side. I have a business where I sell online, do some e-commerce, mostly selling through Amazon, and I do some stock trading. And so right now I'm working at home. It's been really nice, but I'm probably going to get back into teaching here pretty soon. Oh, cool. I sub a little bit right now. But I did my credential is in social studies.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Friends and family, let's see. Trying to think what's noteworthy. So one thing that's noteworthy, friends and family, my wife is a Christian. So that kind of comes into my story.
Okay.
Let's see. I mean, I don't want to bore you with too many personal details. Maybe I'll try to go back. I guess my story as far as this is concerned is pretty early on. I just had trouble just taking existence for granted. So why is there something rather than nothing? And that was just a question that was crying out for answers. And so that sort of pulled me towards belief in God and religion. And I grew up around in a pretty secular world, still do. My family or my family and my friends are all pretty secular. So I wasn't really that exposed to Christianity. I kind of always assumed they had the answers because growing up in the West, that's just kind of what you assume. You see Christian churches, not Buddhist temples and other things. So, I guess fast forward, once I had the time to actually look into it, I was a little disappointed, and I was surprised at a lot of stuff, and it didn't make sense to me. I couldn't find a coherent theology to put together. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the girlfriend I had, who would become my wife, was a Christian, and her family was pretty evangelical. And so that kind of put a little more pressure on me to really figure it out. And I did go to seminary. I quit my job that I was doing, and I went to a liberal seminary for a year. I left after a year just because I couldn't really justify spending the money doing this. I wasn't really looking for a job at the end of it. So I had some formal training, but mostly I've just kind of studied it on my own. And I think there's a nutshell version.
Okay. Well, let me ask you something, Evan.
I got a question for you a minute real quick.
Okay.
Evan, what are you drinking over there? I keep hearing the
I'm sorry. Just a little magic juice here. It's nothing. It's like a LaCroix with some ice in it. Yeah, sorry about that. I thought it was going to be interesting. I thought it was going to be maybe a mixed drink of some kind, but no, it's like what if like flavored water had a sad stepchild and all right, never mind. Let's not bash LaCroix. Hipsters everywhere will get angry.
We're looking to get them as a sponsor, Zach, so we can't bash them. Let me ask you something, Evan. So I was wondering about this, and we never really talked in our correspondence. But how did you get our contact information? These go to 11 contact information. Like, what made you reach out to us? We've had a friend of mine who's an agnostic. He's been on before, but there was a connection here, contact there. Then we had another gentleman on who's Muslim for us who came on, and again, but that was like a contact for another friend. I got it just kind of a blind email from you. Just, hey, I wrote this book. Would you mind reading the book? And then getting in touch with me if you wanted to, talk about the perspective from an atheist. And, I took the book and, passed it on to my partner, Zach. And we were like, yeah, let's go ahead and have you on and we can kind of talk to you about some things, more conversational format. And, we're going to get to some questions that we have for you. You're going to get to some questions that you have for us. And just, again, keep it more of a conversational feel. And I think that'll actually even be a little more interesting than a formal debate. But just tell me, like, how did you kind of go through the process of, contacting us and hearing about us and all that?
That's funny. Yeah. So I had the bright idea of writing a book for some reason. And, I thoroughly enjoyed the process, and it just feels good to get your thoughts down as clearly as you can. But I didn't really have an end goal. I didn't know what to do once I got it out. So I wrote the book, and then what do I do now? And I'm still kind of in that boat. I finished it about a year ago, and I haven't been that actively involved in it. But at that point, I contacted you guys a while ago, actually.
Yeah. This was I think it was back before Christmas, even.
Yeah, I think it was. So I was just here with a book that I wrote, and I said, okay, what do I do now? Maybe try to get on podcasts. So I just started searching around on iTunes and throughout the net. I'd click on a podcast, and then it recommends related podcasts. Mm-hmm. And somehow I came across your podcast, and I listened to an episode or two. So you know what? Throw them an email, and that's about it.
Sweet. Well, we feel honored. I feel honored, and appreciate you reaching out. Zach, I'm going to go ahead and I want to start with you. And I think what we'll do is we'll kind of just go around, and then just each one of us will get an opportunity to just kind of ask a question. So Zach, we'll start with you, give you an opportunity to throw a question out there, and then Evan will jump to you, and then I'll go ahead and ask a question afterwards, and just kind of talk about some of these things and discuss. We'll see how many we get through. Kind of just informal, but we'll see how many of these things get answered today. So cool. Zach, take it away.
All right, man. I'm just wondering when you set out to do this, you say you didn't exactly know what to do after you'd finished the book. Mm-hmm. But a ton of books have been written in this space already. And there are some that are fairly prominent. There are a million that are kind of, lower list, small publishers, self-published, and that kind of thing. And, generally you need to find a hole in the scholarship or a niche that hasn't been touched. And this, a primer of sorts on, the alleged deficiencies in Christianity is anything but. So I'm wondering if, did something give rise in your life? Was it the fact that you were married to a Christian, or what caused you to go through all this once you decided Christianity didn't really make sense to you? I've looked into any number of things that don't make sense to me and rejected them out of hand, but I've never devoted, a couple of years to writing about them and promoting that writing. I'm just curious if there's a backstory to the actual impetus of putting it all down in an organized way.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Like I said, so I was already selling stuff on Amazon. So I think that did kind of spark the idea. It's like, well, if you can find an original product and put it on Amazon, it's a great service. You can get direct to the consumers. So that sparked it. I was thinking, I could just do a quick ebook and put it out there. Why not? And I kind of enjoy the process. And then once I started digging myself deeper and needing to read more books, and it took longer than I expected. But like I said, I was enjoying the process. So, apart from that, I guess it's just, after you've spent a lot of time thinking about something, it's just, and you disagree with a lot of things, and you have free market of ideas. I'm just kind of throwing my 2 cents in the ring to mix metaphors, I guess. And, if anyone happens to find it, then maybe I'll get some feedback and see why, things that seem so clear to me are not to other people. So I just think it's kind of interesting to throw my ideas out there and see what happens.
You're saying that it's less. Your goal is less to cause people to think like you and more to spark dialogue. Or am I putting words?
I guess. I mean, obviously, I think I'm right. Right. Otherwise, I'd have other views.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, there are Christian things about Christianity that I think are not healthy overall, and yeah, I wouldn't mind changing minds, but I don't have like huge hopes for my book. I mean, obviously, it's not taking the world by storm, but maybe after this podcast.
Dude, don't sarcastically throw that out there.
No, I was serious there.
Frankly, there are at least dozens of people listening right now.
Nice. Yeah.
One or two anyway. So Evan, let me go ahead and throw it over to you real quick, give you an opportunity to, throw out a question for us to answer, and give an opportunity for us to answer.
Okay. Real quick. I remembered one more bit of your question about, everything's kind of been done before. I feel like what my book did, like what gaps it filled in counter apologetics, is sort of dealing with the fall, and trying to figure out how people are preserving Adam and Eve in today's culture, where we have, the predominant scientific view, and they don't seem to fit. So that's always been a huge hang up, but I kind of wanted to dig in and see, well, this seems like a showstopper right here. How are people continuing on with that? And then I've always thought hell is just not under the microscope enough. So I guess those are a couple things that I felt had not been done enough. I mean, I'm sure they are somewhere. Those are things that bothered me.
I got you. I would suggest that both of those are being done to death, not in your circles of skeptics and non-believers, but actually within liberal Christianity.
True.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Rob Bell, and I mean, like, basically classical Protestant liberalism has been attacking the notion of Adam and Eve and a literal fall for 110 years. Schleiermacher on through.
So I think the difference now is that evangelicals are doing it. More conservative circles are sort of trying to harmonize the fall with evolution. And that is, whether we consider them liberal or in the middle, or I don't know, people who are retaining the trying to keep a traditional theology together. So those are the books that I came across mostly. Mm-hmm. But I didn't see anybody doing it well.
Interesting.
Yeah. So should I go on? Let me see. You want a question from me?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we start light? Maybe talk about hell. Just kind of ease into it.
Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, this is something that probably the first thing that really shocked me when I started looking into Christianity. Never-ending, utter misery and torment for people who don't embrace Christianity. Mm-hmm. So sort of hell is the default, where people are just on the road. I think Norman Geisler said we're born on the road to hell. And so people who have had no say in their being born are automatically deserving of being punished for eternity for being how they inevitably are. And just disclaimer, I mean, I don't feel like I can talk about this honestly without being kind of blunt. So if I sound a little abrasive, it's just I don't think I could overstate what we're talking about with eternal conscious torment. After 500 trillion years of suffering, that's only just the beginning. You have an eternity left to go. And so this kind of knocked me over. So I don't think, it just seems so outrageous that it gave me huge pause in looking at this. So I don't know. What's my question? Am I being dramatic, or is eternal conscious torment not that bad? How do you deal with this?
I would suggest that it is that bad. When you read Jesus' words about hell, they're never consoling. They're always warning about judgment. Mm-hmm. When you get to an issue like hell, is you've got to recognize it's tertiary, not the central thing that it feels like often. And I think one of the, if I can kind of critique your book, I didn't read the whole thing. I read about a third of it and I skimmed the rest, and that's not an insult. It's just my time that I had available last week. Is that it's always from kind of the perspective of a human trying to make things make sense in our minds with our presuppositions, rather than saying, well, hold on, let's try on some other presuppositions. And it's hard for me to even get involved in like even an informal kind of debate. I'm a presuppositionalist, which is I don't know if you got into it, your liberal seminary apologetical method and stuff, but that rather than an evidentialist, the assumption that I can come to faith and say, well, this is the only way the world really makes sense. But all that to say, I mean, it's hard to address hell without acknowledging that it's going to seem unfair from a human point of view, sitting in the driver's seat of the human soul. We go to Romans and we find in Romans 1 that everybody, according to the scriptures, everybody has innate knowledge of God simply by observing what's around them, the heavens, the creation. From that, we can tell that certain things about God, that He is a divine nature and He's an eternal spirit, and we can know enough to be without excuse. And then it tells us that the reason that we kind of suppress, and I would say kind of, that's the actual word, suppress and distort and sort of push down and twist our understanding of these things is because we have an agenda, and that's to make our own way, be our own God, set our own rules, make our own path. Which, I mean, we'd point back to the fall as the beginning of that, and I know that you're very familiar with that from the book. And once you say, in order to understand some of these things, you have to recognize that natural man has a self-imposed impediment and an agenda that is set against understanding it. Doesn't want to understand it, but wants to critique it and call out against God. I mean, Romans 9, we read about the kind of, Paul does this thing in Romans where he's always, it's kind of an annoying thing when your friends do it, where they're like, ask a question and then answer it. Like, are the Beatles the best band ever? Yes. Is Abbey Road their best album? No. But when Paul does it, it's not that annoying. And he kind of anticipates objections and he asks them and then he answers them. And in one section in Romans 9, he basically says, how can God then find fault? Which is kind of what I think you're saying. If God created us and people are born already under the curse of sin that came through Adam, there are those, in certain Christian traditions who don't hold to original sin. They'd say everyone has sinned, and apart from that, they'd be okay. But accepting original sin, how is that fair, or how could God do that without being, morally at fault? And to that, Paul basically says, who are you, O man, to answer back to God? In Romans 9:20, will what is molded say to the molder, or will the clay say to the potter, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honored use and another for dishonorable use? So the idea that we can kind of sit back in the armchair theologian, philosopher backseat and critique the Almighty, it seems like a no-brainer to someone who's coming at it from a very human point of view, but from somebody who's coming at it with a presupposition that they're testing to see if it holds water, that God is who He says He is in the Scriptures, and that they are truly true self-revelation of a divine being. We have that rebuke, and I'm sure to you it seems like a very sneaky dodge, and I mean that's just going to be where we're coming from, two very different places. Nathan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of change gears just slightly here. And Evan, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and tell me, describe heaven for me. You talked about hell, and I'd like you to take an opportunity in a moment just to tell me what you think about heaven and what you think heaven's like, and describe that for me. Describe the flip side of that coin.
I don't know much about it. I would assume the flip side is eternal bliss. So instead of being absolutely miserable for eternity, you're absolutely content and happy for eternity. And you live with God, and that makes you happy.
Okay.
And there's no, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And
I don't know if there's a great description in the Bible.
They're
you kind of cobble together some things.
Yeah. See, to me, what I see in what you said, I mean, I think what you said in that second part is absolutely huge and key. Whenever the Bible talks about us being with God, us being with Christ, whether it's in reference to in heaven when we die, whether it's in reference to at the end of eternity once, or at the end of the earth once everything's been remade and been renewed, there's always a description in there about heaven being with Christ. The concept is that what makes heaven so great isn't all the stuff that people think we get. And I've had conversations with so many people that are like, well, heaven's basically an eternal amusement park, and heaven's this and heaven's that. The descriptions we always get of heaven are our proximity to the one who redeemed us, Jesus Christ. And so my question would be, if you're not interested in Jesus Christ here on earth, why would you be interested in eternity with him afterward?
It's not that I'm not interested in following God, it's that I don't think it's true.
Right, so you're not interested in it, essentially. I mean,
I am very interested. I just don't think, just like you don't think other religions are true, it's not that doesn't mean you're not interested in following what's true or God. I mean, trust me, going to eternity in hell, that's definitely not what I want.
Well, but
if I believed it were true, trust me, I'd be right with you.
Well, but the thing is, like, I'm not interested in Islam in terms of what it has to offer. I'm not interested in Buddhism and what it has to offer. I'm not interested in those things and what they have to offer. The thing that is appealing for me is this relationship that I have with the one who redeemed me, the one who saved me.
Right. So what pulled me into all this is because I didn't want to take existence for granted. If the creator of the universe has a plan for me, has a message for me, I want in. Mm-hmm. But I looked into Christianity and just thought, I don't think this is true. So I can't trick myself. And, I'm not thumbing my nose at God. I just don't think it's true. I mean,
I think, Nathan, is this what you're trying to say essentially is, and tell me if I'm wrong,
mm-hmm.
is that hell is essentially existence apart from the presence of God, of whom Christ is the exact representation for us. And so for God to deny someone eternity in his presence, if they have no interest in his presence, is something that makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Does it make perfect sense to you guys? Hell, keeping someone alive for eternity to be punished?
It doesn't to me. No. And I would say that, the way I was taught theology by Dr. Michael Whitmer at Grand Rapids Theological Seminary and Art Crawford is that there's basically, we think of kind of a narrative theology even within systematic theology, which is a 4-part thing: creation, fall, and then you have the story of Christ coming, redemption, and then the 4th part is consummation. So creation, and again, I know I'm not teaching you something. I'm just making a point here. So creation, everything is created, everything is good. Fall, sin enters the picture, and with it, death, sin, hell, etc. Redemption, Christ comes, bears the wrath of the Father, covers our sin, takes away our sin, redeems us, restores in a very real way the relationship that was present in creation, and even better. And then consummation, meaning the return of Christ and all things made new, and the last enemy that's destroyed is death, et cetera, et cetera. So of those 4 categories, creation, fall, redemption, consummation, only one doesn't make sense, and that's fall. And so, by it doesn't make sense, I don't mean it doesn't logically make sense to a Christian. I mean, it's just not the way things are supposed to be. It's twisted. It's taking the good thing God made and turning it and crumpling it. It's that Romans 1, distorting and suppressing truth. And so something like death, something like hell, if it made perfect sense, it wouldn't be fall. It would fall into another category. Something that makes us say, gosh, it doesn't sit right with me. If it's part of the fall, which is essentially our contribution to the story, it's not a huge deal breaker for me that it doesn't sit well. In fact, if that category of things, sin, brokenness, the shattering of shalom, sat well with me, that would mean that I it would be a big problem. I wouldn't have the glory of God in mind. I mean, I know you don't swallow that, but does that make sense? Do you get what I'm saying?
Not really. I mean, are you trying to make, let's see, you're saying hell doesn't, I don't understand. Does it make sense to you that, I mean, is it logical or loving in any way that, we're not talking about Hitler and Stalin, we're talking about ordinary people that had no choice in their being born. And as your theology dictates, they cannot be good enough for God. They automatically will deserve being punished for eternity. I mean, if you're willing to rationalize that, what could you not rationalize? I mean, you kind of has said might makes right, or we can't know what, God's ways, but all we have is our human brain to look into this stuff and decide what makes sense. And I can't think of anything farther from making sense or being loving. I mean, that's
I think you've got your presupposition there that firmly intact. And I did find it.
What do you mean?
Well, hold on. I'll get there. I marked a few spots that I would consider begging the question, meaning suggesting that your conclusion as kind of the premise. And what I mean by your presupposition there is that when you say, is this loving, is this good, for this to happen, that you're assuming that we should have equal say with God. You're assuming that everything needs to make sense by my categories, and that you're essentially assuming that the scriptures aren't true, because if they are, then the answer is, who are you, O man, to answer to answer God? So your assumption that the scriptures aren't true leads you to believe that the scriptures aren't true. Your assumption that your brain is the only thing you have by which to determine truth. That's your epistemology. That's a presupposition, and I would challenge that. I would say that the way that I have to determine what's true is not just my brain, but that I have the Holy Spirit of God illuminating the scriptures to me, and I have the revelation of God. And I mean, even in basic philosophy, you have more than one, in basic epistemology, you have more than one source of knowledge. You have even intuition. But I would say that as a Christian, we teach, Nathan and I believe that we have the Holy Scriptures, which is God's self-revelation. And granted, we don't just go, okay, well, then we accept it. Because if we were to do that, we'd accept the Book of Mormon, we'd accept the Bhagavad Gita, we'd accept any divine sacred text or whatever. But having put it to the test, we find it to be, unlike you, to be reliable. And therefore, we have this source of knowledge that's not just me in my super finite mind looking at... Go ahead.
You have to use your mind to decide. You said it's an assumption that I don't think Scripture is true. The only way we can come to that you're starting with the presumption. It sounds, well, I thought you were saying you were starting with the presumption that it's true. And then you kind of went back to my position and said, well, no, we looked at it and decided it's true.
No, presuppositionalism says you start with the presupposition that it's true and see if it works. It's basically like getting in a car and starting going down the highway. I mean, if you're going to buy a car, you don't literally take the whole thing apart, make sure every piece is in perfect working order, put it all back together, go, okay, now I'm satisfied, I'll take it. No, you get in the car, you take a drive, and you come back and go, everything handles pretty well, I'm in one piece still, it feels like a good deal, you buy it.
Yeah, well, all I can say, I came to the Bible wanting it to be true.
I believe you.
Yeah.
I believe you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would argue that you think you did, and that there was certainly a element, like again that Romans 1, that suppressing the truth of God, where there was a certain amount of I deserve in there, or a certain amount of the fact that when you came to the conclusion that it's not true, you turn around and say, I got to write a book about this and really drag this thing. Tells me where your heart was, and I'm not trying to make assumptions about you. I'm saying this is what the scriptures teach us about everybody, so I feel safe saying it in this case.
Yeah, that's a hard bridge to cross, because I clearly don't think scriptures are perfect. We can rely, just because there's a line in the scripture, you think you can assume that I didn't really want to be a Christian or look at it. I just was trying to thumb my nose at God. There's so much in the Bible that is problematic that, Yeah, this is tough. I mean, when you look at other religions, they're clearly not thumbing their nose at God. They're trying to follow God. You don't decide Christianity's true, so I'm going to become a Muslim. I mean, that just doesn't happen. So, I mean, do you think Muslims and Mormons and every other religion, they're really just thumbing their nose at God and trying to disobey him?
I would say to a degree that religions that put the onus on the individual to be good enough, that is, in a sense, a thumbing of the nose to God. Sure, if you want to use your terminology. And that it's tragic. The scriptures teach us that you cannot be good enough of your own volition, your own merit. The scriptures say that our most righteous works are filthy rags in his sight. So sure, yeah. I mean, and I know that certainly coming out of a liberal seminary and living in the world we live in now, it's very common to hear people trying to talk more politic and avoid saying things like that. But I mean, the historic Christian position has been, this is why the word heathen exists, is that there is one way. Jesus said that clearly. I am the way, the truth, and the life. If anyone comes to the Father, it's going to be by him, and that any other way is going to lead down the broad road that leads to destruction. So yeah, I would say that. I mean, I respect that you hold that line, because I think there are I mean, you can kind of sense it in my book that I kind of resent people that hold this belief but beat around the bush, and it is an unpopular position for good reason. To say everyone else is going to be punished for eternity, yikes. And that's part of my title, Christianity No Longer Makes Sense. I don't know how many Christians that does make sense to today, that all the people that don't, have not accepted Jesus will be kept alive for eternity in utter horror.
Well, I mean, by definition, I mean, a Christian is one who is like Christ. I mean, that's where they get their title. It's from those back in the early church who were living like Christ, teaching the things that Christ taught. And the people around them were like, oh man, you look like this person, Jesus, you look like a little Christ. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like saying that, I don't know who in Christianity this makes sense to today. Like the reality is denying scripture is denying Christ, denying what he taught. Somebody might call themselves a Christian who doesn't hold to these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. I mean, Christianity is one of those things, again, going back to it, when people saw what the disciples were teaching, how they were acting, how, the fact that they looked like Christ, that's when this title came around. I mean, that didn't exist, for the first several years of Christianity. This is something it's like, hey, you remind us of Jesus. You remind us of the things he taught, the things he said, the things he did. And so we bestow on you this name, Christian, little Christ. So... a little confused.
I think part of what I think whose argument, I'm not sure, you were saying that basically we don't get to choose with our what's right. We have our little human brains, and I would agree. Just because I think it's horrendous doesn't mean it's not true. Like I wouldn't make that. I don't get to choose what's true, right? If there's a God that created the universe, which I'm totally open to. Whatever he says goes, right? But my point would be that it's when there's something that outrageously, I would say illogical and hard to believe, that should throw up huge red flags that this better be built on stable ground for me to accept that. And that's where I go when I look into it and I say, well, actually this worldview is built on the idea that we're fallen. And if you ask me, I mean, science has uncovered a completely different story that is inconsistent with the one Christianity was built upon. So not only do we have this idea in hell, but it was built on something that's sort of outdated, if you ask me. I don't think you can fit a fall into what we know today about the Earth's history.
I was wondering if you could actually elaborate that on a little bit, because again, being a science teacher, like I'm always fascinated when people go to science. Because as soon as somebody goes to science or assumes that science is the answer to everything, and I don't know if you make this claim or anything like that, but I have several friends of mine who are atheists who make the claim, I'm a man of science, whatever is there is acceptable. and whatever's not isn't really true. And the fact of the matter is, science is a tool. Science is there for use. It has a specific goal and function within our categories of things that we learn. And science's goal is to raise questions, to propose experiments to answer those questions, and then to report what those findings are. And the fact of the matter is, you can only scientifically do those things with hard physical data that you have. In order to answer the questions about the origins of the earth, you can't answer those questions scientifically because no one was around to experience those things. Nobody was around to test those things and to continue repeating those experiments and tests. And
yeah,
so,
but you know how many scientists would completely would not accept what you say.
They would. I mean, it doesn't matter if they accept it or not. It's the truth. That's what the goal of science is, and that's the problem. Is that in our society today, we've tried to take the realm of science and move it into a realm where it doesn't belong or exist. Science cannot do a job other than what it is assigned to do. And just because we have people who are trying to do it doesn't mean that that's what should be done.
So you don't think science can say anything about human origins?
No, it can't, because nobody was around to explain them. We have to go to history. We have to start looking at history in order to answer those questions.
Okay, so how about, do you guys think evolution and Christian theology are compatible?
I don't condemn people who hold to that position.
No, certainly not.
I mean, I don't think.
You think they pull it off though?
I go back and forth on it. I sometimes will. There's a guy named Peter Kreeft, who's a Catholic apologist at Boston College. I think he's not maybe not there anymore, but a brilliant philosopher and with a gift of kind of bringing everything to a very popular level and being funny and yet conveying truth. And he often will write articles, which I find a lot better than like the Hugh Ross stuff and some of the things that you reference in the book, about how, when you look at the odds of evolution happening sans any kind of divine guiding hand, it's beyond astronomical, to the point where he would scoff and laugh at you accepting that and say, but we can see, the history of it. We can see the evidence for it. And so I think this makes it all the more credible that there's a God that's creating God that has done this in this way.
So I think Nathan would say he can't even do that. He's not on solid ground even saying that we can see that.
I don't agree with Nathan on that, but I'm in his discipline if we're talking about science. He's not in mine, so I'll let him go.
No, what I would say is that I think there are evidences that we can look at that point to certain things, but you can't say with certainty this is how it is. And I think that's the difference, where people will try to look at things. I mean, first of all, the whole problem with evolution starting on its own and trying to prove that scientifically is science disproves something just spontaneously coming into existence in the first place.
I grant that gives me pause. That gives me pause for sure. That's a mystery.
Right. The first law of thermodynamics, it shoots that right in the foot. So if you're going to try to use science 100% and not bring in theology or philosophy or history in order to try to explain some of these other things and in order to try to look at something, then you run into a deficiency, because science cannot explain in that regard the origin. There is no explanation in that regard.
Yeah, I would think I think science can do a lot, and it has done a lot. But I think there are. I mean, I think the problem of something rather than nothing, I think that's a fundamentally different kind of question that I would grant to the theists and say I don't think science can really touch that.
Right, and so that's what I was saying, where science can't fully answer that question. We have to delve into other possibilities. What I'm saying is that a person who says that science is the only possible thing that could ever explain all of these things, they're fundamentally going to be missing other aspects that science just doesn't explain and science can't explain. Science will never be able to overcome that essential problem of the first law of thermodynamics. If you say that you are a person of science and you're going to use science to explain the origins of the earth, science disproves the origins of the earth from that perspective, unless we completely disregard those laws of physics. So I have to disprove the laws of physics in order to prove how the Earth came into existence. But I can't disprove the laws of physics, because if I disprove the laws of physics, then I'm shooting myself in the foot when it comes to everything else that science has shown us and taught us. So I either accept that as a truth, an absolute truth, and so this piece is wrong, and so there has to be something else here that science can't prove, and so I have to use something else in order to prove that, which can't be science. I have to use philosophy. I have to use history. I have to use worldview. Does that make more sense in what I was saying?
Yeah, I would just, you're just drawing the line in a different place, saying that we can't know anything about our past. I think we have a pretty darn good idea. And if you look at evolution is thoroughly accepted in every university, minus a few very conservative Christian ones, including Catholic universities. Across the globe, across cultures, it speaks with one voice. And I think Christianity is in a very precarious place if the two can't go together. That's a lot for Christianity to convince the scientific worldwide community that evolution is not true.
Well, first I would say, I think we need to define evolution. Evolution is
human evolution.
Okay, and I would say that that's a problem because there is no scientific evidence pointing to species to species evolution. The world has yet to prove it. The world has yet to produce viable specimens. We have drawings, we have theories, but we have no viable specimens showing the actual evolution of one species to another. We have no physical evidence showing it. We have no scientific evidence showing it. We have theories, but there's no actual physical proof.
Can I want to real quick ask Nathan a question, because I think this is fascinating stuff, which is, you read the book, and he references something in here that I've always found fascinating, which is that we can drill down through layers of ice and see year by year like what the world was like. And I think there's something like 400,000 or 500,000 years worth of ice. So, can we know that was there and that the world was here that long ago? Or do you really think that's not possible?
No. What I was trying to convey, what I believe science could and couldn't do. No, I think we can know some things. I don't think science limits us from knowing things. I think science, though, is limited. And so for someone to say that science has answered all of our questions, science is going to answer all of our questions, I think takes a very narrow view of what science, or I think it actually takes a wide berth and gives more credibility to science than what it actually can do. Science can tell us that those things are there, that, we have layers upon layers in the earth. Science can tell us, that we found these things. But ultimately, science can't tell us the history of those things. We have to look at other subjects in order to understand those periods, those people, in order to get ideas of what's going on within cultures and civilizations that are there. That's not the realm of science. That's not the job of science. Yeah, the job of science is to go ahead and stick my drill down and pull up samples and start testing those samples for things and then give my conclusions for what I find in those samples. But science's job isn't to go in and say, well, you know what, I found the bones of this person and these are the things that I've discovered about this culture and this society and this history. That's the job of another field of study and discipline. And those people who are in that field of study and discipline are very good at doing their job. I think the problem is scientists think that their field is all-encompassing in every area and that they are qualified to answer questions that actually don't fall into their realm. And I think
you see that a lot with, sorry to interrupt, but I think you see that a lot with Dawkins, where he's, what is it? What is his actual discipline? It's his degree
evolutionary biology.
Evolutionary biology. Yeah. And yet when you read his books, it's like he thinks he's a theologian, a philosopher, a linguist. And granted, people are going to write widely if they have wide interests, and it's popular level stuff. But I get what you're saying. I didn't understand at first, but I see what you're saying there. There are limits to this stuff. It's not going to be the savior. If you're looking for the savior, you got to look somewhere else.
Right. And so to answer questions about the origin of the earth, if you're going to look at science, and I'll just repeat that real quick, you're going to miss something, because science at this point in time can't answer that question, and I don't think it's ever going to be able to answer that question without finding a flaw within our understanding of science, which is going to blow up the whole scientific community if that happens. Like, the realm of science is to be fixed and steady. You have the laws of physics. You have the laws of, you have all these laws and principles that guide the assurities that we see within our universe. And so if you're going to then break those laws in order to explain the origins of the earth, which is what many people essentially do. Many people don't admit that, okay, we have a problem here with the origin of the earth. And so when you do that, you're essentially saying, well, we're going to throw out the first law of thermodynamics and basically say that, we're just going to skip over that, say this is how the world began, and move on from there. Where if you say this is how the world began, you're throwing out the first law of thermodynamics. You're distorting or destroying one portion of science for another. And so at some point you have to say, okay, science can't answer this question, so what am I going to answer that question? And the answer to that question comes from our worldviews, our presuppositions. The reason why many of those people believe that this is what happened isn't because that's where the science is pointing them to. The science is actually pointing in the opposite direction, saying, no, that couldn't happen that way. But they're accepting it as it is because of their worldview and their presupposition.
Look, I think there's so much science can tell us. How about this? I think science can pretty confidently tell us that death did not enter the world because of human sin. Death has been around from the beginning. And it's a key ingredient to evolution and how species go extinct and new ones emerge. I think the Bible clearly got that one wrong, if you ask me. Saying death is a result of Adam's sin.
A catastrophic event like the flood actually very easily explains the extinction of species.
Okay, so you think there was a worldwide global flood?
Oh yeah, and if you look at many different cultures around the world who've never even gotten their hands on the Bible, so do they. I mean, that's a pretty convincing argument when you go around to cultures independent of the Word of God, and there somewhere in their history is in some capacity
there's flood stories all over.
Flood.
Yeah,
that's not coincidental.
Are you a young Earth creationist?
That is an entirely complicated question, because I do believe that there are some things that are missing that people don't quite acknowledge. So first of all, I believe, 6 days, the Bible says God created the earth in 6 days. However, the Bible doesn't tell us how long Adam and Eve existed in the garden before the fall of man. I think there could have been a whole swath of time in there that we're not aware of in between that time of creation and his rest and the time that Adam and Eve sinned. And I don't know that Christians necessarily give enough credence to that portion of time within there.
Doesn't the Bible tell us how old Adam and Eve were when they died, though? That would limit how long they lived in the garden before the fall.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're going into, if you only have, a couple more minutes with us, we're going into a whole lot of other stuff that could, blow this conversation.
But you don't think science has debunked the view that the Earth is 6,000 years old?
I would say that to put an age on the earth is I'm not comfortable, and I tell my students this, I'm not comfortable putting a specific age on the earth. That I'm not comfortable with that. And I tell them exactly, and again, without going into all the details, I basically tell them that within that time period that the earth could be a lot older, but I also know that based on what scientists think, that God could have created Adam and Eve, the whole universe, with age. From the best of our knowledge and ability, to look at what the Bible says, that Adam and Eve were created with a certain level of age. They weren't created as infants. So is it so difficult to believe that that they were created with age, but the rest of creation was created as a quote-unquote newborn?
Does it give you pause that so many conservative Christians are fleeing these positions? And I mean, even reasons to believe. I mean, they're not claiming a worldwide flood because they know it's indefensible scientifically. I mean, they've moved it to
with that highly. I would disagree that a worldwide flood. I mean, I would disagree with that significantly.
But I mean, there's so many
tons of evidences for a worldwide flood.
Yeah.
There's tons of evidence for a worldwide
It's
flood.
not convincing to so many conservative Christians.
Just
though.
because it's not convincing, there's a lot of things that's not convincing to people. It doesn't mean that it's not true. Mount St. Helens, when Mount St. Helens erupted back in the 1980s, it was thought that it was going to take years upon years upon years for everything in that area to regrow and come back to normal. And what do we find? Within about a decade, the plant life started coming back. The animals started coming back to that area. Every time that somebody makes an argument for, this is going to prove exactly how old the earth is, we find that it actually doesn't. The Grand Canyon had to have formed over millions of years. And then we start doing tests and we start saying, oh, wait, no, actually a worldwide flood could have caused the Grand Canyon to form just as easily as, that timeline. Again, the Mount St. Helens thing. When we sent people to the moon, those astronauts who were first setting foot on the moon were essentially tethered to the landing craft. The reason why they were tethered was because the idea of how much space dust was actually going to be on the moon, it was thought to be much greater than that because of the age of the Earth. And then they kind of jumped down and they were like, oh, it's not really as deep as we thought it was. Because the age of what they thought it was and what they thought should be there wasn't. So for every argument that somebody has about, oh, look at this piece, I have another piece of information that I can say, well, what about this? How do you explain this? Because according to evolution, this should be true. And again, we're talking about not evolution as in change over time, but we're talking about the differences of, the more Darwinian, interspecies evolution, millions, billions of years, all that stuff. That's, just kind of clarifying that's what we're talking about. But every time, somebody pulls out a piece of it, well, what about this? Okay, well, what about this? There's always an argument back and forth. And so to say with certainty, well, wait a minute, people are abandoning and going in this direction. Okay, well, I don't understand why, because there's also evidence that points over here saying, well, there's a young earth. And this is where I go back and forth and I say, you know what, I'm not sure where I fall and land on that, because I'm not sure what God decided to do in the beginning and how he did it. All I know is that when Scripture says, in the beginning, God, that's what I believe, that first cause was God.
Do we have time for me to jump in with one more question? I think you guys might be at an impasse on this.
5 minutes? I'm pushing. I got to take my daughter to gymnastics. But yeah, go ahead.
Gymnastics. Nice. My son's at karate right now. That's nice. Also cool. Just neither here nor there. Wasting time, Zach. Okay. I'm wondering what your take is on people who have come from a very kind of hard-hearted agnostic or atheistic side, went about trying to create, sometimes with an entire career, a case against Christianity and then become converts. And I mean, I'm not just talking about like Josh McDowell or people who, seem to have, maybe that's a shtick. You got Lee Strobel, who was a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. Anthony Flew, very famously, one of the most famous atheists, brilliant philosopher. Never became a Christian, but did near the end of his life become a theist, which was a huge...
Or maybe even a deist.
What's that?
He might have been a deist.
I don't know. I just read his book about a month ago, and it's pretty clear. I mean, he self-identifies as a theist. And I don't even see it as huge, like a win for Christianity if someone moves from agnostic to saying, oh, I think I might be a theist. I don't care. Without Christ, that's no help. But I mean, what do you do with those guys? I mean, do you have to assume they were either very foolish or they didn't see something you did or what? Because it seems like a lot of your argument is, I came at this thing wanting it to be true and found it wanting. What about people who came at it not even wanting it to be true and found it overwhelmingly convincing?
Look at the world. I mean, there's examples of people switching from every conceivable worldview. I mean, that's just human beings. So there's plenty of people who grew up Christian, looked into it, and pulled away. There's a bunch of scholars like that. There's, Protestants who went Catholic. There's, people who converted to Islam. I just, it's hard to put weight on that. All I can do is look at the arguments that I see and say what makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that's the best fair answer. I'm wondering why is it because of the audience you had in mind, or why is it that you've got Rick Warren and Ken Ham and some of these people with extended block quotes, but not John Lennox or John Frame or even Peter Kreeft or somebody like that? It seems like you're giving you're pulling up our JV team so that they'll go down easier.
The earmuffs, Rick Warren. I don't know. I feel like I use a lot of. Rick Warren's not a fringe figure, but
no, but he's certainly no theologian.
Yeah, but I don't think what I quoted him saying. It doesn't sound like you guys would disagree with what he said. This is pretty standard stuff. William Lane Craig's in there, and I dealt a lot with biologos people who are. I don't know if you're saying they're too conservative, or you're just saying they're not academic enough.
I'm saying that they're halfway to a straw man. Biologos, okay, you got some brilliant people there, but I don't fall into that camp. So I felt like,
I think you'd have to point out what quote is not representative of Christian theology. I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't think I used fringe figures, but we'd have to get into more specifics there. I'm not sure I have time for it.
Okay,
but
I'm
not
suggesting they were fringe people. I'm suggesting maybe they were too mainstream. Yeah.
I don't think any of the quotes I use misrepresent Christian theology.
I think they underrepresent it in that they don't make a good case. I would suggest it'd be like if I wrote a book saying I'm going to tear down evolution and this kind of sort of scientific skepticism permeating everything in the world, and I just was like, look what Bill Nye has said, and everyone would come up and be like, Bill Nye, he's like Dr. Science, who's not a real scientist but has a bachelor's degree in science, and that wouldn't be fair. That wouldn't be. I don't think that would be.
Yeah, I don't think I've done that, but we'd have to look at specifics.
Okay, those are two specifics right there. And
which one? Rick Warren, he just basically talked about the fall. That shouldn't be that controversial. Who was the other one?
But no, I'm saying Rick Warren. You quote the purpose-driven life, and the thing that he says, I would not be a big fan of the way he put that. But
okay.
It's not gonna make me call the guy a heretic or anything. My point is that the selection in general of who's going to represent kind of the intellectual prowess of the opponent is you're going from the shallow end of the pool.
Well, no, the quote you used is where Rick Warren is sort of giving this evangelist speech about why you need to be saved. And my point is showing how even these mainstream figures are soft pedaling hell and even hiding it. So that's my point there. That's not an academic point. That's just showing how it's being presented to the public. And Rick Warren is probably the perfect person to put it there because he's got such a huge following.
Well, that'd be a big beef I have with Rick Warren. In that specific situation.
So we agree.
Yeah, well, and I'm not saying that in each position that I find these quotes, they're the worst one that could be there, or they're dishonest and they're not representing Christianity, some form of Christianity. But if you were to line up kind of the sources that you used for where you have landed with your own worldview and epistemology, and then the sources that you cite for the opposing view, it seems like the Chicago Bulls playing Schenectady junior high B team.
Yeah, well, I don't know who you mean there. But, that's something we could get into specifics maybe in another time.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you probably got to get going, and I don't want to mess up your daughter's gymnastics schedule. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're
thanks for having me on, though. I know these are we went pretty hard, kind of some heavy material. So
absolutely.
Thanks for having me on, having a heathen on there.
I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, it was a great time. We're just going to go ahead and sign off now, gentlemen. We just rocked the Casbah.
These go to 11.